Hello and welcome to Lingering Light, your sanctuary for listening on YouTube. I am so grateful you've joined our circle tonight. Go ahead and get settled, perhaps loosen your tie, kick off your shoes, and let the rigid shoulds of the day dissolve into the deepening shadows. Before we meet our friend Edward, I want to tell you about the remarkable woman who inspired tonight's talk, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross was born on July 8, 1926, in Zurich, Switzerland. In 1958, she moved to the United States after marrying Emanuel Ross, a fellow medical student she had met in school. Imagine a tiny, fierce woman who spent her entire life sitting at the edge of hospital beds, holding the hands of the dying. While other doctors were focused on heart rates and charts, Elisabeth was listening to the soul. She was a pioneer of the hospice movement, famously identifying the 5 stages of grief, but more importantly, she was a witness to the final, crystal-clear clarity that comes when life reaches its horizon. She realized that the dying are our greatest teachers because they no longer have the energy to lie. They don't regret their messy mistakes, they regret the years they spent pretending to be perfect. Tonight, we are unveiling her heart-opening masterpiece, Life Lessons. She taught that life is a school, and our greatest assignment isn't to graduate with a perfect GPA of achievements, but to be authentic. She famously said, "People are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed only if there is a light from within." To help us find that inner light, let's meet Edward, the architect, Vance. Edward is 75 and a retired architect who built his entire life on the religion of precision. In Edward's world, a 91-degree angle was a personal insult. His blueprints were flawless, his lawn is mathematically trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches, and his reputation in the city is spotless. Edward has spent 7 decades wearing what he calls his mask of competence. He never showed anger, it was unprofessional, never admitted he was lonely, it was weak, and never let anyone see him sweat. He believed that to be loved, he had to be a monument of unshakable strength, granite and steel. But now, in the quiet of his garden, the monument is starting to feel very heavy. The granite is cracking. And Edward realized he had spent his whole life building a beautiful, museum-quality house that no one, not even himself, felt comfortable actually living in. That is, until he opened Life Lessons and read a sentence that felt like a wrecking ball to his ego. Learning our lessons is not about making our lives perfect, but about seeing life as it was meant to be. Edward had a collection of fine porcelain, all perfectly preserved behind glass. One Tuesday afternoon, while reaching for a biscuit, he accidentally chipped his favorite teacup, a delicate piece he'd brought back from London years ago. Usually, Edward would have felt a surge of acidic irritation and thrown it in the bin immediately. To Edward, a flaw wasn't just a mark, it was a moral failure. He couldn't stand the sight of a broken thing. But he had been reading a passage that challenged his rigid world. We are not here to become perfect. We are here to learn. And the most important lessons are often found in our broken pieces. Perfection is a polished wall, it keeps people out. Vulnerability is a door, it lets people in. Edward looked at the chipped cup, then at the age spots on his own weathered hands. He realized that for 70 years, he had been trying to be that glass-encased porcelain. By hiding his chips, his past business failures in the 80s, the silent, suffocating grief after losing his brother, and his terrifying fear of no longer being useful, he had made himself unapproachable. He was a perfect statue in a park that no one dared to sit on or embrace. "I've been so busy trying to be a masterpiece for the neighbors," Edward mused, tracing the rough, jagged crack in the porcelain with a trembling finger, "that I forgot to be a person who breathes." He decided, in a moment of quiet rebellion, to keep the cup. He even thought of the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. He realized that his own scars were not something to hide under a high-collared shirt, they were the gold thread of his story. For the first time, he felt a strange, cooling relief in being damaged. Edward's relationship with his adult daughter, Clara, was a masterpiece of polite distance. They talked about the weather, the fluctuating stock market, and the price of heating oil. Edward believed he was being a heroic father by serving as a pillar of stability, never allowing her to see his cracks. He never complained about his nagging hip pain or mentioned how the house felt like a tomb since his wife, Eleanor, passed away. He believed his silence was a gift to her. The book offered a stinging, necessary insight: to love means to be seen. You cannot truly love someone if you are hiding your true self behind a mask of fine. We think we love others by taking care of them, but we love them most by letting them take care of us. That Sunday, when Clara visited, she sat on the edge of the sofa and asked her usual, autopilot question, "How are you, Dad?" Normally, Edward would have straightened his posture and said, "Splendid, Clara, just splendid. The roof needs a look, but I'm fine." Instead, he paused. He felt a lump in his throat that felt as big as a brick. "Actually, Clara," he said, his voice cracking like that teacup, "I've been feeling quite lonely this week. The silence in this kitchen is louder than I'd like to admit. And truthfully, I'm a bit scared about this surgery next month." The silence that followed wasn't the cold, awkward kind, it was a sacred, breathing space. Clara's eyes filled with sudden tears, and she reached out to hold his hand, really hold it, for the first time in a decade. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, "I've been waiting for you to say that. I felt like I was visiting a museum when I came here. I've missed you, not the architect." Edward realized that his perfection had been a 10-foot wall. By showing his wound, he had finally allowed his daughter to find the door. As an architect, Edward's mind always lived 5 years in the future. He was perpetually planning the next renovation, the next milestone, the next garden layout. He viewed time as a resource to be managed, a set of billable hours, rather than a gift to be unwrapped. He was a master of when-then thinking: when the garden is finished, then I'll sit and enjoy it. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross warned him from the pages, "Guilt and regret are the two thieves that steal our present. Guilt is about the past, worry is about the future. But life is only happening in the sliver of time we call now." Edward stood in his backyard, looking at his meticulously kept roses. He realized he spent more time worrying about the aphids and the pH of the soil than actually enjoying their fragrance. He was 75 and still preparing to live, like an actor who stays in the dressing room rehearsing until the theater is empty. "I've spent 7 decades waiting for the completion of my life's building," Edward thought, watching a fat honeybee struggle to land on a lavender bush. But life isn't the finished skyscraper, it's the dust motes dancing in the sun on the construction site. He decided to fire himself from the job of time manager. He sat on his porch for 2 hours, doing absolutely nothing productive. He didn't pull a single weed. He watched the shadows of the oak trees crawl across the grass. He actually tasted the bergamot in his tea. He discovered that when he stopped trying to build the future, the present moment revealed itself as an architectural marvel that needed no blueprints. Edward carried a heavy, invisible suitcase packed with should-haves. He should have worked less when Eleanor was young, he should have taken that artistic risk in his 40s instead of the safe corporate job, he should have been a warmer brother to the sibling he'd argued with. He was his own harshest critic, a judge who never granted parole and a prosecutor who never slept. The book reached out with a gentle hand: "You did the best you could with the tools you had at the time. To hold on to guilt is to pretend you are a god who should have known the future. You are just a human. Forgive yourself for being a beginner at life." Edward closed his eyes and tried a visualization exercise. He imagined the younger version of himself, the stressed, ambitious, 40-year-old Edward who was terrified of failing his family and drank too much coffee to stay awake. Instead of pointing a finger and calling him a failure for his mistakes, the older Edward felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of compassion for that tired man. "You weren't a villain, Edward," he whispered to the memory. "You were just a beginner who didn't know how to ask for help. And you were doing your best with a very heavy load." He realized that his past mistakes weren't stains, they were the tuition he had to pay for the wisdom he was finally holding now. He decided to symbolically burn his list of regrets in his mind. As the imaginary smoke rose, he felt a literal weight lift from his chest. He wasn't a bad man trying to become good, he was a learning man finally allowing himself to be human. As Edward turned 76, he no longer looked like the perfect architect. He was a bit slower, his hair was a silver mess, his house was a little less tidy, and he was much quicker to admit when he was confused or out of breath. But curiously, his eyes were brighter and his laughter was louder than they had been in 40 years. Kübler-Ross's final lesson is about the light. The only thing that survives after we are gone is the love we gave and the authenticity with which we lived. When you stand at the end of your life, you won't care about your achievements, you will care about how many people truly knew you. Edward sat in his garden, cradling that same chipped teacup, now beautifully mended with its golden lines. He looked at the sunset, a messy, unarchitected explosion of pink and orange, and realized he no longer needed to be a monument of granite. A monument is cold and unmoving. He wanted to be a stained glass window. I'm not a finished blueprint, Edward thought with a peaceful, mischievous smile. I'm a living, breathing work in progress, and the cracks are exactly where the sun gets in. He realized that the lesson of life isn't about getting an A+ or building the tallest tower, it's about having the terrifying courage to show up for class as your messy, wonderful self. He was 76 years old, and he was finally, perfectly, imperfect. As Edward embraced his imperfections, a curious thing happened to his professional identity. He began to look at his old blueprints, those cold, precise monuments to perfection, and felt a strange detachment. He realized that for decades, he had built houses that were architecturally sound but spiritually silent. He recalled a thought that often sat at the bedside of Kübler-Ross's patients: our work is not our life. Our work is merely a vehicle through which we express our humanity. If we are not human in our work, then the work is empty. Edward decided to volunteer at a local community center that was planning a small expansion. Instead of arriving with a rigid, high-tech plan and a master architect attitude, he showed up with a sketchbook and a willingness to listen. He sat with the teenagers who would use the space, the elderly who wanted a sunlit corner, and the teachers who needed a place for messy art. He didn't just design a building, he designed a feeling. When a young student nervously pointed out that a certain window might be too big or out of place, Edward didn't scoff. He smiled and said, "That's where the surprise lives." Sometimes the best parts of a building are the parts that don't quite follow the rules. He was no longer building for his own glory or for a pristine portfolio, he was building for the life that would happen inside. Edward discovered that his greatest legacy wasn't the skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but the small, human spaces where people felt seen and accepted. By allowing himself to be cracked, he had become a master at creating spaces where others could finally breathe. My dear friends, at Lingering Light, Edward Vance discovered that his brokenness wasn't a tragedy, it was his liberation. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's message is a profound gift for all of us: don't wait until the end of your life to learn how to live. Stop trying to be a polished, impenetrable wall. Be a window. Let people see your mess, your doubts, your beauty, and your truth. I have a question for you tonight. What chip or flaw in your life have you been trying to hide from the people who love you? What would happen if you stopped trying to fix it and started gold mending it with a little self-compassion? Share your kintsugi moments in the comments. Let's celebrate our beautiful imperfections together. Good night, dear friends. Show some love by hitting like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment. Thank you.